I used to avoid reading about evolution and creation because the Christian shops are full of books by creationists who argue that the Earth is 6,000 years old, which I believe is as fanciful as evolution. But then I came across a book by Benny Hinn called Angels and Demons, which delves deeply into Jewish scriptures from the Tanakh, portraying a very old Earth with pre-human inhabitants. This presentation briefly looks at some of the scriptures that Benny Hinn has found that give a very convincing argument that the Earth is old and that there were indeed intelligent races before humanity came to inhabit the Earth. Looking at Genesis 1, there seems to be a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Genesis 1:1 reads, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Beginning here is the Hebrew word bereshit, which means dateless past. But Genesis 1:2 reads, "The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep." The word was here can mean became, so the earth went from God's perfection to void. Genesis 1:28 gives further indication of this. It tells about the creation of the first man and woman in the image of God, and God told them to replenish the earth and subdue it. Replenish means it was made empty, and so they were commanded to fill it up again, suggesting that the world was less than perfect. And why subdue it if it was perfect? Something happened to make the earth destitute. There is a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, but why and what happened? Scriptures from the book of Job, which is thought to have been written in the 6th century BC, and from the prophet Isaiah, written in the 8th century BC, give some valuable insights. Job 9:5-7 reads, "He removes the mountains, and they do not know when he overturns them in his anger. He shakes the earth out of its place, and its pillars tremble. He commands the sun, and it does not rise. He seals off the stars." The sun has not failed to rise in the history of the human race. This passage suggests that God was angry at the inhabitants of the earth before us and that he radically altered the natural world. Isaiah 24:1 reads, "Behold, the Lord makes the earth empty and makes it waste and turns it upside down and scatters abroad its inhabitants." There is evidence that the poles have been reversed, but this happened before the human race came to be. This verse suggests God was very angry at the inhabitants of the earth before the existence of mankind and scattered them by reversing the poles. Scriptures from the book of Job suggest that God sent a great flood to destroy the earth's inhabitants prior to the birth of mankind, and that he made the waters to freeze. Job 38 verses 25-26 read, "Who has divided a watercourse for the overflowing of waters, or a way for the lightning of thunder, to cause it to rain on earth where no man is, on the wilderness wherein there is no man?" And verses 28-30 read, "Has the rain a father? Who has begotten the drops of dew? Out of whose womb came the ice? And hoary frost of heaven, who gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen." These scriptures indicate that God sent a flood and turned the waters into ice, starting an ice age before the existence of mankind. Jeremiah the prophet lived in the 7th and late 6th centuries BC. His words also give insight into the world before humankind. Jeremiah 4 verses 23-27 read, "I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of heaven were fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord and by his fierce anger." This also suggests that God turned inhabited cities into wastes because of his anger, but there was no man, so it was before humanity. Notice that these scriptures also describe the earth as without form and void and dark, as in Genesis 1:2. According to Jeremiah, this was done deliberately by God in his anger. All these scriptures point to a pre-human race that enraged God, so he destroyed them by a flood and then froze the waters.